The winter morning of 342 BC brought death to Kabyle. Philip of Macedon's siege engines, towers taller than the fortress walls, bronze-headed rams weighing tons, had finally breached the Thracian stronghold. Inside, Cersobleptes watched his kingdom's last organized resistance crumble. The mines that had funded Odrysian power for generations were gone, seized by Macedonian forces. The cavalry that had terrorized the Balkans was scattered. 2 centuries of independence were ending not with glory, but with systematic strangulation by a military machine unlike anything Thrace had ever faced. This was how the Odrysian Kingdom died, not suddenly, but gradually, as Philip methodically dismantled every foundation of Thracian strength. The gold mines of the Aegean hills that had generated over 1,000 talents annually now filled Macedonian treasuries. The tribute system that had bound dozens of tribes to Odrysian authority had collapsed into fragmentation. The sophisticated administration that once managed territories from the Danube to the Aegean existed only in Macedonian-controlled form. Cersobleptes retained his royal title, but possessed no real power. The transformation was complete, but this ending had origins in spectacular beginnings. 5 centuries earlier, in 460 BC, a chieftain named Thrace emerged from the upper Hebrus River Valley with a vision that would shake the ancient world. While Athens and Sparta fought for Greek supremacy, while Persia threatened from the east, Thrace was forging something unprecedented in the Thracian highlands, a centralized monarchy that would grow into an empire, commanding 150,000 warriors and challenging the greatest powers of antiquity. This is the story of that rise and fall, of the Odrysian Kingdom that briefly made Thrace a name, spoken with respect and fear from the Danube to the Mediterranean. Long before Thrace, the Thracians were not a unified people, but a tapestry of fierce tribal confederations scattered across the southeastern Balkans. The Getae controlled the fertile Danubian plains from the Black Sea to the Carpathian foothills, their fortified settlements commanding river crossings where merchants paid tribute or died. Archaeological excavations at Zimnicia and Bordushani reveal massive storage facilities and irrigation systems supporting dense populations and professional warrior classes who spent their lives perfecting the art of killing. Their distinctive pottery featured geometric patterns and animal motifs, but their real artistry was in bronze weapons and the willingness to use them. In the Rhodope Mountains, the Bessi Confederation extracted silver and gold from extensive mining operations, while their hilltop fortresses ringed with massive stone walls and sophisticated water systems dominated the strategic passes. Travelers crossing Bessian territory paid heavy tribute for safe passage, funding elaborate religious ceremonies and monumental architecture. Their reputation as fierce warriors and skilled metalworkers was well earned. Their weapons displayed distinctive artistic styles, combining geometric patterns with stylized animals. But more important than artistry was function. A Bessian blade could punch through armor, and Bessian warriors knew mountain warfare like farmers knew their fields. Along the Black Sea coast, the Thracian Chersonese Confederation controlled fertile river valleys and natural harbors. They developed sophisticated maritime technologies, large rowing vessels capable of both river and sea navigation, and their dock facilities and warehouse complexes facilitated trade throughout the Black Sea region. Then, in the 8th century BC, everything changed. Greek colonists arrived, establishing permanent settlements at Apollonia Pontica, Mesembria, Odessos, and Thassos. They brought viticulture, olive cultivation, advanced pottery techniques, architectural knowledge, and writing systems. More significantly, they brought political concepts and administrative practices that would provide models for ambitious Thracian leaders to transform their tribal confederations into something far more dangerous. Centralized kingdoms. The Greeks also brought trade, and trade brought wealth, and wealth brought power to those who controlled it. Greek merchants penetrated deep into Thracian territory, exchanging manufactured goods, wine, and olive oil for Thracian grain, livestock, metals, and slaves. Local chieftains, who controlled access to Greek goods, gained prestige and political influence that eclipsed traditional tribal hierarchies. Archaeological sites from the 7th and 6th centuries BC show increasing quantities of Greek pottery, coins, and luxury goods, alongside hybrid artistic forms, blending Greek techniques with Thracian motifs. The cultural exchange was not one-sided. Greek colonies adopted Thracian agricultural practices, military techniques, and religious customs that proved advantageous. But the Greeks gave the Thracians something more valuable than goods: the idea that political power could be centralized, bureaucratized, and projected across vast territories. Before this transformation could occur, Thracian religion provided the spiritual foundation. They worshipped a great goddess identified with the Earth Mother, depicted as a huntress accompanied by wild animals who controlled fertility, death, and rebirth. Her nocturnal rituals involved ecstatic dancing and ritual intoxication, designed to facilitate communication with the divine realm. The cult of Dionysus held particular significance. Many Greek sources claimed the god originated in Thrace before being adopted into the Greek pantheon. Thracian Dionysiac rituals involved fermented beverages, frenzied dancing, and ritual sacrifice inducing altered states of consciousness. These practices were conducted in sacred groves and mountain sanctuaries that served as pilgrimage destinations and, crucially, as centers of political authority. The Thracian hero horseman, a divine figure depicted riding a horse and carrying a spear, represented the ideal warrior who achieved immortality through glorious death in battle. This mythological figure would later influence royal iconography and provide a model for kingly authority based on divine favor and military prowess. Ritual tattooing among Thracian nobles served both religious and social functions, with specific patterns indicating tribal affiliation, social rank, and spiritual protection. Greek sources describe elaborate tattoo designs covering arms, legs, and torsos, creating distinctive visual markers reinforcing group identity and individual status. The cult of Zalmoxis, a deity associated with immortality who descended into the underworld and returned with death's mysteries, involved elaborate initiation ceremonies and the belief that worthy individuals could achieve immortality through proper ritual observance and moral conduct. These religious traditions would later influence Odrysian concepts of royal authority and divine kingship, providing the ideological foundation for centralized monarchy. Around 460 BC, as Athens built its empire and Persia recovered from defeats in Greece, a Thracian chieftain named Thrace looked at the fragmented tribes around him and saw opportunity. The Odrysian tribe he led occupied strategically advantageous territory in the fertile river valleys between the Rhodope Mountains and the Balkan Range, rich agricultural land with extensive grain fields, vineyards, and pastures supporting both dense populations and the horses essential to Thracian military effectiveness. For generations, the Odrysians had maintained trading relationships with Greek coastal colonies, providing access to advanced weapons, luxury goods, and, most importantly, knowledge of Greek military and administrative techniques. Thrace possessed both the vision and military capability to transform temporary tribal dominance into lasting political structure. Unlike previous Thracian leaders who contented themselves with raiding and temporary alliances, Thrace understood that sustainable power required institutional foundations. He initiated consolidation by systematically eliminating rival claimants within his own confederation. The traditional Thracian practice of blood feuds and competing royal lineages had historically prevented unified leadership, but Thrace employed military force and strategic marriages to neutralize internal opposition. He arranged marriages between his relatives and daughters of subordinate chieftains, creating kinship networks that bound formerly independent leaders to his authority through family obligations and shared interests. This was statecraft borrowed from watching Greek city-states, adapted to Thracian cultural expectations. The military innovations that enabled Terrace's success drew heavily upon both traditional Thracian warfare practices and techniques observed from Greek military operations. Thracian warriors had always excelled in individual combat, wielding their distinctive rhomphaia pikes and sika daggers with deadly effectiveness. But Terrace introduced disciplined formation fighting that multiplied battlefield impact. He organized forces into units of approximately 100 warriors, each commanded by a trusted lieutenant who had sworn personal loyalty to the king through elaborate oath ceremonies conducted at sacred sites. The Odrysian military system combined the mobility and individual skill of traditional Thracian fighters with the coordination and tactical flexibility that had made Greek hoplite formations so effective. Thracian cavalry, mounted on sturdy horses bred in the river valleys, served as both scouts and shock troops capable of rapid deployment across varied Balkan terrain. Terrace's first major campaign targeted the Sapian Confederation, which controlled the strategic Maritsa River Valley and maintained close relationships with several Greek coastal cities. The Sapians had traditionally served as intermediaries in trade between the Thracian interior and Greek colonies, accumulating considerable wealth used to hire Greek mercenaries and purchase advanced weapons. Their principal stronghold, Aenos, commanded river traffic and overland routes connecting the Aegean coast with the Danubian plains. Thrace launched his attack during winter months when traditional Thracian warfare typically ceased. This unexpected timing caught Sapian forces dispersed in winter quarters, preventing coordinated defense. The Odrysian army moved rapidly along frozen river valleys, capturing isolated settlements and cutting communication between Sapian strongholds. The siege of Aenos lasted 3 months. Terrace demonstrated sophisticated engineering capabilities his forces had developed through contact with Greek military techniques. The Odrysian siege works included wooden towers allowing attackers to fire down into the fortress, battering rams constructed according to Greek designs, and tunnel systems undermining sections of defensive walls. When Aenos finally fell, Thrace executed the Sapian royal family, but spared the general population. He incorporated Sapian warriors into his own forces and appointed Odrysian governors to oversee conquered territory. This pattern, eliminating rival leadership while preserving local populations, became a hallmark of Odrysian expansion policy. It was efficient, pragmatic, and ruthless. The conquest of the Sapian Confederation provided Terrace with control over crucial trade routes and demonstrated to other Thracian tribes that the traditional balance of power had shifted decisively in favor of the Odrysians. The wealth captured from Sapian treasuries funded further military campaigns and allowed Terrace to reward followers with land grants and positions of authority within the expanding kingdom. Greek merchants, who had previously dealt with Sapian intermediaries, found themselves negotiating directly with Odrysian officials, who proved equally capable of maintaining commercial relationships while extracting higher tribute payments. Thrace was learning the economic foundations of empire: control trade, control wealth, control power, and he was just beginning. Following success against the Sapians, Thrace turned attention to the Bessi Confederation in the Rhodope Mountains. The Bessi controlled extensive mining operations, producing the silver and gold essential to maintaining military forces and conducting diplomatic relations with Greek city-states. Their mountain strongholds presented significant tactical challenges. Narrow valleys and steep slopes negated many advantages that Odrysian cavalry and formation fighting provided in open terrain. But Thrace was learning to adapt tactics to circumstances. He recruited local guides familiar with mountain trails and employed small, highly mobile units capable of operating independently in difficult terrain. Rather than attempting direct assaults on fortified positions, the Odrysians implemented economic warfare, capturing mining settlements and disrupting trade networks supporting Bessi military capabilities. The decisive engagement occurred at a mountain pass, where Bessi forces attempted blocking Odrysian access to their primary silver mining district. Thrace employed a complex pincer movement, using terrain to his advantage, sending cavalry units along ridgelines to attack Bessi flanks, while his main infantry force engaged their front lines in the narrow pass. The battle lasted from dawn until midday, with both sides suffering heavy casualties before the Bessi formation finally collapsed under coordinated assault. It was brutal, close-quarters fighting where Thracian individual combat skills proved decisive. Bodies piled in the narrow pass. The wounded screamed for hours, but when it ended, the Bessi submitted. The submission of the Bessi Confederation brought crucial mining districts under Odrysian control, providing financial resources necessary to support further expansion. Thrace appointed Odrysian overseers to manage mining operations, while allowing Bessi technical specialists to continue their work under new management. Another example of his pragmatic approach to conquest. The silver and gold extracted from these mines funded purchase of Greek weapons and equipment, supported diplomatic missions to Athens and other major powers, and financed construction of royal residences and administrative centers throughout the growing kingdom. Thrace was building the infrastructure of empire, military force backed by economic exploitation, backed by administrative control. The model would serve his successors well, until it didn't. The administrative innovations Thrace implemented to govern expanding territories represented sophisticated synthesis of traditional Thracian practices and Greek organizational techniques. The tribute system, forming the backbone of Odrysian administration, required conquered territories to provide annual payments of grain, livestock, metals, and military service. These tribute obligations were calculated based on productive capacity of each region and adjusted periodically to account for changing economic conditions and population levels. Local administration remained largely in the hands of traditional tribal leaders who'd submitted to Odrysian authority, but these officials operated under supervision of royal appointees who ensured compliance with central government policies. The royal appointees, typically drawn from the Odrysian nobility or proven military commanders, possessed authority to collect tribute, recruit soldiers, and adjudicate legal disputes that crossed tribal boundaries. The establishment of a permanent royal court represented perhaps the most significant departure from traditional Thracian political organization. Previous Thracian leaders had maintained seasonal camps that moved according to military campaigns and pastoral cycles, but Thrace constructed a fixed capital complex near modern Plovdiv that served as the administrative and ceremonial center of the kingdom. The royal court included residential quarters for the king and his family, administrative offices for government officials, workshops for producing royal regalia and weapons, and religious facilities where state ceremonies could be conducted. The physical layout reflected both Thracian architectural traditions and Greek influences adapted to local conditions and requirements. Surrounding the central royal complex, administrative buildings housed the growing bureaucracy that managed tribute collection, military recruitment, and diplomatic correspondence. These officials, many of whom had received training in Greek administrative techniques, maintained written records using adapted Greek scripts that allowed for more sophisticated record-keeping than had been possible under traditional oral systems. The integration of Greek administrative practices extended beyond simple record-keeping to encompass legal procedures, taxation methods, and diplomatic protocols that enhanced the kingdom's ability to interact with Greek city-states and other Mediterranean powers. Thrace employed Greek secretaries and advisors who possessed the linguistic skills and cultural knowledge necessary to conduct negotiations with Athens, Sparta, and the various Greek colonies along the Thracian coast. These Greek officials served not as rulers but as technical specialists who helped translate Odrysian political objectives into forms that Greek diplomats could understand and accept. Thrace was building an empire that could speak the language of power in the ancient Mediterranean world. The relationship between the emerging Odrysian Kingdom and the Athenian Empire during the Confrontation period reflected complex geopolitical dynamics of the mid-5th century BC Mediterranean world. Athens, at the height of its imperial power following victories over Persia, sought to secure its northern approaches and ensure reliable supplies of grain and timber from the Black Sea region. The Thracian territories controlled crucial overland routes and possessed military strength to either facilitate or disrupt Athenian commercial and strategic interests. Initial diplomatic contacts between Thrace and Athenian representatives occurred around 455 BC, when Athenian envoys arrived at the Odrysian court, seeking assurances that Thracian forces would not interfere with Athenian operations against Persian-held territories in the northern Aegean. These negotiations revealed the sophisticated diplomatic capabilities that the Odrysian court had developed. Thrace's representatives demonstrated detailed knowledge of Athenian political structures, military capabilities, and strategic objectives. The diplomatic agreement that emerged from these negotiations established a framework for cooperation that benefited both powers while preserving Odrysian independence and territorial integrity. Athens recognized Odrysian control over the Thracian interior and agreed to limit Greek colonial expansion to coastal areas that did not threaten established Thracian settlements. In return, Thrace guaranteed safe passage for Athenian merchants and military forces traveling through Thracian territory, and agreed to provide military assistance against mutual enemies when requested. The practical implementation of this diplomatic relationship required careful attention to interests of Greek coastal cities that had previously maintained independent relationships with various Thracian tribes. Thrace demonstrated considerable diplomatic skill in negotiating arrangements that preserved Greek municipal autonomy, while establishing clear boundaries for Odrysian and Athenian spheres of influence. The military cooperation between Odrysian and Athenian forces provided both sides with valuable experience in coordinating different military systems and tactical approaches. Thracian cavalry and light infantry proved particularly effective in supporting Athenian hoplite formations during operations in rough terrain, where traditional Greek military formations faced significant disadvantages. Athenian naval capabilities complemented Thracian land forces by providing logistical support and preventing enemy forces from receiving reinforcements by sea. When Thrace died around 445 BC, he left his son Sitalces, a kingdom that had demonstrated its capacity to challenge the established order of the ancient world. The transformation from tribal confederation to centralized monarchy was complete. The next generation would take it further, much further. Where Thrace had focused primarily on consolidating Thracian territories and establishing diplomatic relationships with Greek powers, his son Sitalces possessed the vision and military capability to transform the Odrysian Kingdom into the dominant force throughout the entire southeastern Balkans. The inheritance Sitalces received provided him with unprecedented resources and organizational capabilities. The tribute system generated enormous wealth from conquered territories. The administrative apparatus centered at the royal court near Plovdiv had evolved into a sophisticated governmental structure capable of managing vast territories and diverse populations. The military reforms implemented during the previous reign had created professional fighting forces that combined traditional Thracian warrior skills with Greek tactical innovations, producing armies that could operate effectively across the varied terrain of the Balkan Peninsula. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout the Odrysian heartland reveals the massive military preparations that characterized the early years of Sitalces' reign. Excavations at weapon manufacturing centers have uncovered evidence of dramatically increased production of standardized spears, swords, and armor components. The scale of these operations suggests that Sitalces was equipping forces far larger than any previous Thracian ruler had commanded. Storage facilities constructed during this period could accommodate grain supplies sufficient to support armies numbering in the tens of thousands for extended campaign seasons. This was not preparation for raids or border skirmishes. This was preparation for conquest on a scale unprecedented in Thracian history. The territorial expansion that defined Sitalces' reign began with campaigns against Thracian tribes that had remained independent during his father's consolidation efforts. The Tribali, who controlled the strategic Morava River Valley and maintained fortified settlements along the approaches to the Danube, represented the most significant obstacle to Odrysian expansion toward the north. Their territory encompassed crucial river crossings and mining districts that would provide both strategic advantages and economic resources essential to supporting larger military forces. The campaign against the Tribali demonstrated the sophisticated military planning capabilities that Sitalces had developed through careful study of both Thracian and Greek warfare practices. Rather than launching direct assaults on heavily fortified positions, the Odrysian forces implemented a comprehensive strategy that combined economic warfare, diplomatic manipulation, and coordinated military operations across multiple fronts. Advanced units disrupted tribal trade networks and captured grain storage facilities, creating supply shortages that weakened enemy resistance before major battles occurred. The decisive engagement took place near the confluence of the Morava and Danube rivers, where Tribalian forces had concentrated to defend their principal stronghold. Sitalces deployed his cavalry in a complex flanking maneuver that exploited the marshy terrain along the riverbank, while his main infantry force engaged the tribal center in a frontal assault designed to fix enemy forces in position. The battle lasted throughout an entire day, with both sides demonstrating the fierce fighting qualities that had made Thracian warriors legendary throughout the ancient world. Thracian war cries echoed across the riverbank as formations clashed in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The marshy ground made cavalry charges treacherous. Horses stumbled, throwing riders into the mud, where they drowned in their armor. Infantry formations hacked at each other with Rhomphaia pikes and Sika daggers until the Morava ran red. The Odrysian victory at this engagement effectively eliminated organized Tribalian resistance and opened the entire Danubian region to systematic conquest. Sitalces appointed Odrysian governors to oversee the captured territories, while incorporating Tribalian warriors into his own forces through oath ceremonies that bound them to personal loyalty to the king. The wealth captured from Tribalian treasuries funded further military campaigns and provided resources for construction of fortified administrative centers throughout the newly conquered regions. With the Danubian approaches secured, Sitalces turned his attention to the coastal regions, where Greek colonies maintained complex relationships with various Thracian tribes. The strategic situation along the Thracian coast had evolved significantly since his father's reign, as the outbreak of the Peloponnesian War had created new opportunities for ambitious rulers willing to exploit the conflicts between Athens and Sparta. The incorporation of the coastal regions required different tactical approaches than the mountain and river valley campaigns that had characterized earlier Odrysian expansion. The Greek cities possessed sophisticated fortifications, professional military forces, and naval capabilities that traditional Thracian warfare methods could not easily overcome. Sitalces addressed these challenges by recruiting Greek military advisors and mercenaries who possessed the technical knowledge necessary to conduct siege warfare and coordinate land-sea operations. The integration of Greek military specialists into Odrysian forces represented a significant evolution in the kingdom's military organization. These advisors brought knowledge of advanced siege techniques, including construction of battering rams, siege towers, and catapult systems that could breach the massive stone walls protecting Greek coastal cities. More importantly, They provided training and coordination of different military units and logistical planning necessary to support large-scale operations over extended periods. The military organization that emerged under Sitalces represented a sophisticated synthesis of Thracian, Greek, and barbarian elements that maximized the strengths of each component while minimizing potential conflicts and inefficiencies. The traditional Thracian cavalry remained the elite strike force of Odrysian armies, with mounted units organized into squadrons of approximately 50 riders commanded by members of the royal family or trusted nobles. These cavalry formations operated with remarkable independence, conducting reconnaissance missions, raiding enemy supply lines, and exploiting tactical opportunities that arose during major engagements. The famous Thracian cavalry that became legendary throughout the ancient world during Sitalces' reign combined exceptional horsemanship with weapons and tactics specifically adapted to mounted combat. Thracian horses, bred in the river valleys of the interior, possessed the stamina and agility necessary for rapid movement across varied terrain while carrying fully equipped warriors. The riders themselves underwent rigorous training from childhood, developing skills in mounted archery, spear combat, and sword fighting that made them formidable opponents in both individual duels and mass formations. Each rider carried multiple javelins with iron points designed to penetrate armor and shields, a curved sword optimized for mounted combat, and a small round shield decorated with personal and clan symbols. The horses were equipped with bronze-reinforced bridles and saddlecloths that provided protection while allowing the mobility essential to cavalry effectiveness. These were not ceremonial warriors, but professional killers who'd spent their entire lives mastering mounted warfare. The infantry forces that formed the backbone of Sitalces' armies incorporated elements drawn from throughout the expanded Odrysian territories, creating military units that reflected the ethnic and cultural diversity of the kingdom, while maintaining tactical cohesion and effectiveness. The heavy infantry consisted primarily of Odrysian and allied Thracian warriors, equipped with the traditional rhomphaia pikes, bronze-reinforced leather armor, and large oval shields that had proven effective in previous campaigns. Supporting the heavy infantry, Sitalces deployed extensive light infantry forces recruited from mountain tribes throughout the kingdom. These warriors specialized in skirmishing tactics using javelins, slings, and bows that could harass enemy formations and exploit tactical opportunities without engaging in direct confrontation. Greek officers typically served as technical specialists responsible for siege operations, logistics planning, and training of Thracian forces in advanced tactical formations. However, overall command remained firmly in Thracian hands, with Greek advisors operating under the authority of Odrysian nobles who possessed both military experience and political legitimacy within the kingdom's power structure. The Great Invasion of Macedonia in 429 BC represented the culmination of Sitalces' military preparations and the most ambitious campaign ever undertaken by a Thracian ruler. The strategic context emerged from the complex diplomatic and military situation created by the Peloponnesian War. As both Athens and Sparta sought allies capable of opening new fronts against their enemies, Macedonia under King Perdiccas II had maintained a precarious neutrality that satisfied neither major Greek power, while creating opportunities for Thracian intervention. The immediate catalyst came from Athenian diplomatic overtures promising significant rewards in exchange for Odrysian military intervention against Macedonian territories. For Sitalces, the invitation provided an opportunity to extend Odrysian influence into regions that had previously remained beyond Thracian reach. The military force that Sitalces assembled for the Macedonian campaign dwarfed all previous Thracian armies in both size and organizational sophistication. According to Thucydides, the invasion force numbered approximately 150,000 warriors drawn from throughout the Odrysian territories and allied tribes. This massive army included roughly 50,000 cavalry, representing the largest mounted force ever assembled by a non-nomadic people in the ancient world. The logistical challenges of moving and supplying such a force required unprecedented organizational capabilities and demonstrated the administrative sophistication that the Odrysian Kingdom had achieved. The composition reflected the territorial extent of Sitalces' dominions and the military resources that systematic conquest had placed at his disposal. The core of the force consisted of approximately 40,000 Odrysian warriors, equipped with standardized weapons and armor, produced in the kingdom's manufacturing centers. These troops represented the professional military establishment that had evolved during decades of continuous warfare and territorial expansion. Allied contingents provided additional specialized capabilities. The Getae contributed approximately 30,000 warriors, including elite cavalry units mounted on horses bred specifically for warfare in the Danubian plains. Mountain tribes provided light infantry specialists whose knowledge of irregular warfare tactics proved invaluable. Even tribes from beyond the traditional boundaries of Thracian territory, including groups from the northern Carpathian region, sent contingents to participate in what was perceived as a historic opportunity for plunder and territorial gain. The psychological impact on Macedonia and the broader Greek world cannot be overstated. The appearance of such a massive barbarian army, operating with obvious strategic coordination and tactical sophistication, challenged Greek assumptions about the military capabilities of non-Greek peoples. Macedonian settlements throughout the border regions were abandoned as their populations fled southward, carrying reports of Thracian military strength that spread panic throughout the region. The siege of Macedonian strongholds during the campaign demonstrated the advanced military engineering capabilities that Odrysian forces had developed through their integration of Greek technical knowledge with traditional Thracian warfare practices. At the fortress of Idomene, Sitalces' engineers constructed elaborate siege works that included wooden towers exceeding the height of the defensive walls, battering rams protected by wheeled shelters, and tunnel systems designed to undermine the foundations of key fortifications. These were not crude barbarian attacks, but sophisticated operations that would have impressed any Greek military engineer. The economic impact of Sitalces' territorial expansion extended far beyond the immediate military conquests to encompass fundamental changes in trade patterns, resource exploitation, and wealth distribution throughout the southeastern Balkans. The Odrysian control of territory, stretching from the Danube to the Aegean, created unprecedented opportunities for the systematic exploitation of natural resources and the regulation of commercial activities that had previously operated. Beyond centralized political control, the tribute system that Sitalces expanded and refined during his reign generated wealth on a scale that transformed the material culture and political capabilities of the Odrysian Kingdom. Control of major trade routes between the Greek world and the barbarian territories of Central and Eastern Europe provided the Odrysian Kingdom with enormous revenues from customs duties and transit fees. The exploitation of gold and silver mines in the Aegean hills represented perhaps the most significant source of wealth that enabled Sitalces to maintain his massive military forces and conduct the ambitious campaigns that characterized his reign. These mining operations, which had been developed initially under local tribal control, were systematically expanded and rationalized under Odrysian administration. The introduction of more advanced extraction techniques, improved transportation systems, and centralized processing facilities dramatically increased the output of precious metals available to the royal treasury. The mining operations in the Aegean hills employed thousands of workers drawn from throughout the Odrysian territories, including prisoners of war, debt slaves, and free laborers attracted by relatively high wages. The working conditions in these mines were harsh by any standard, with workers facing constant dangers from cave-ins, flooding, and toxic gases that made mining one of the most hazardous occupations in the ancient world. But the enormous profits generated by these operations provided the financial foundation for Odrysian military and political expansion. The standardization of Odrysian coinage during Sitalces' reign facilitated commercial transactions while projecting royal authority and political legitimacy throughout the kingdom's territories. The death of Sitalces in 424 BC during a campaign against the Tribali marked the beginning of the most turbulent period in Odrysian history, as the vast territorial empire he had constructed lacked the institutional mechanisms necessary to ensure peaceful succession. The enormous wealth flowing from the Pangaean hills, mines, and tribute payments from conquered territories had created a prize worth fighting for. The sophisticated administrative apparatus that had managed territories from the Danube to the Aegean suddenly found itself divided among competing authorities, each claiming legitimacy while undermining the centralized control that had made Odrysian dominance possible. Southeastern I, the nephew of Sitalces, emerged as the most prominent claimant to the Odrysian throne, controlling the traditional heartland around the upper Hebrus River Valley and commanding the loyalty of the core Odrysian tribal units. However, Southeastern faced immediate challenges from other members of the extended royal family who possessed their own claims to legitimacy and territorial bases of support. Sparadochos, who claimed descent from Thrace through a different lineage, controlled significant territories in the eastern regions near the Black Sea coast, where his authority was recognized by several Greek colonial cities that had maintained tributary relationships with the Odrysian Kingdom. The fragmentation of royal authority created opportunities for regional strongmen who had served as provincial governors under Sitalces to assert greater independence and pursue their own territorial ambitions. In the northern territories along the Danube, a commander named Medicus established what amounted to an independent principality by exploiting the confusion following Sitalces' death. The military forces that had enabled Odrysian expansion now became instruments of internal destruction as competing claimants turned the kingdom's sophisticated military organization against itself. The first major engagement between rival claimants occurred near the confluence of the Hebrus and Maritsa rivers, where Southeastern encountered forces loyal to Sparadochos in a battle that demonstrated both the military capabilities internal division was squandering and the tactical sophistication that Thracian warfare had achieved. The engagement began at dawn with cavalry skirmishes as mounted scouts from both armies probed enemy positions and attempted to identify tactical advantages in the marshy terrain along the riverbank. Southeastern deployed his forces according to the tactical principles that had proven successful during Sitalces' campaigns, with heavy cavalry on the flanks, supported by infantry formations equipped with the traditional rhomphaea pikes and reinforced by units of Greek mercenaries. The battle developed into a series of separate engagements as the broken terrain prevented coordinated movements by large formations. The famous Thracian war cries that had once struck terror into Greek and barbarian enemies now served to rally warriors fighting against their own countrymen in conflicts that served no purpose beyond the ambitions of competing royal claimants. Brothers killed brothers. Clans that had fought together under Sitalces now faced each other across corpse-strewn battlefields, fighting over the remnants of an empire that was tearing itself apart. The engagement lasted throughout the day, without producing a decisive victory for either side, as both armies suffered heavy casualties while failing to achieve their strategic objectives. Southeastern retained control of the battlefield after Sparadochos withdrew his forces during the night, but the Pyrrhic nature of this success became apparent when several tribal contingents that had fought loyally during the battle subsequently defected to pursue their own interests, rather than continue supporting a cause that offered little prospect of meaningful rewards. The inconclusive nature of this and similar engagements between royal claimants created conditions that encouraged the fragmentation of authority throughout the former Odrysian territories. The tribute system that had generated enormous wealth for the royal treasury broke down as regional strongmen diverted payments to their own treasuries while maintaining only nominal acknowledgement of royal authority. The breakdown of central authority had immediate consequences for the Greek coastal cities that had prospered under Odrysian protection while contributing to royal revenues through tribute payments and commercial taxes. Cities such as Apollonia, Pontica, and Mesembria found themselves caught between competing Thracian claimants who demanded continued tribute payments while lacking the military strength to provide effective protection against raids by independent tribal groups or rival regional commanders. The political chaos in the Thracian interior created opportunities for external powers to intervene in ways that would have been impossible during the height of Odrysian unity under Sitalces. Macedonia, which had suffered devastating raids during the Great Invasion of 429 BC, began supporting Thracian factions that seemed likely to remain weak and divided rather than pose renewed threats to Macedonian territorial integrity. King Archelaus II recognized the strategic importance of preventing any restoration of unified Thracian power that might threaten Macedonian interests. Archelaus implemented a sophisticated policy of diplomatic and military intervention designed to maintain Thracian fragmentation while expanding Macedonian influence in regions that had previously been beyond his reach. He provided financial support to multiple Thracian claimants simultaneously, ensuring that none possessed sufficient resources to eliminate their rivals while all remained dependent on Macedonian assistance. The gold and silver that flowed from Macedonia into Thracian treasuries represented investments in regional instability that served Macedonian strategic interests. Athens, despite its alliance with Sitalces during the Peloponnesian War, recognized that a divided Thrace posed fewer threats to Athenian interests, while providing opportunities to secure favorable commercial arrangements with individual Thracian rulers who lacked the strength to impose unfavorable terms on Greek merchants. The Odrysian Kingdom, which had briefly made Thrace a name, spoken with respect and fear throughout the ancient Mediterranean, was fragmenting into squabbling factions easily manipulated by the very Greek powers it had once challenged as an equal. Against this backdrop of political chaos and economic decline, Codus I emerged from the eastern territories around 383 BC with a comprehensive strategy for reunifying the fragmented Odrysian domains. Unlike previous claimants who had focused primarily on military conquest and the elimination of rivals, Codus possessed a sophisticated understanding of the administrative and economic foundations necessary for sustainable political authority. His approach to restoration combined traditional Thracian concepts of royal legitimacy with Greek organizational techniques and Persian administrative practices that he had observed during his youth as a hostage at the Persian court. The territorial base from which Codus launched his reunification campaign encompassed the fertile river valleys between the Hebrus and Maritsa rivers, including several fortified settlements that had maintained their prosperity through careful neutrality during the worst phases of the civil wars. Codus distinguished himself from rival claimants through his systematic approach to territorial consolidation, which emphasized the restoration of administrative institutions and economic systems, rather than merely the accumulation of military victories. His first major initiative involved the re-establishment of tribute collection systems in territories under his control, but with modifications that addressed some of the grievances that had contributed to regional resistance against centralized authority. The military reforms that Codus implemented during the early phase of his restoration campaign reflected lessons learned from the failures of previous decades and incorporated innovations derived from his observations of Persian, Greek, and Macedonian military systems. The professionalization of the royal army under Codus involved the establishment of permanent military units whose members received regular payments, standardized equipment, and systematic training that transformed them from seasonal warriors into career soldiers. The siege of Kabyle in 380 BC demonstrated the sophisticated military engineering capabilities that Codus's forces had developed through their integration of Greek technical knowledge with Thracian organizational systems. Kabyle, located on a defensible hilltop overlooking the Tunja River, had served as the stronghold of a regional commander who controlled several tributary settlements and maintained independence through a combination of natural defensive advantages and diplomatic relationships with neighboring powers. The Odrysian siege works constructed around Kabyle included wooden towers that exceeded the height of the fortress walls, providing platforms for archers and artillery engines that could suppress defensive fire while protecting assault troops. The battering rams employed during the siege incorporated design features adapted from Greek and Persian models, but modified to accommodate the specific characteristics of Thracian stone and timber construction techniques. The tunnel systems that Codus's engineers excavated beneath Kabyle's walls represented the most technically challenging aspect of the siege operations, requiring knowledge of soil conditions, structural engineering, and the placement of wooden supports that could be burned to collapse sections of the defensive walls. The successful capture of Kabyle, after a siege lasting 4 months, provided Codus with a strategic stronghold that controlled river traffic and overland routes throughout the central Thracian territories. The restoration achieved under Codus I proved fragile in the face of new challenges emerging from Macedonia, where a young prince named Philip II had begun implementing military and political reforms that would fundamentally alter the balance of power throughout the Balkans. The assassination of Codus I in 359 BC, orchestrated by Greek agents seeking to prevent closer ties between the Odrysian Kingdom and Athens, created a succession crisis that coincided precisely with Philip's accession to the Macedonian throne. This timing proved catastrophic for Thracian independence, as the kingdom's internal divisions provided opportunities for systematic Macedonian expansion that Philip exploited with ruthless efficiency. The immediate aftermath of Codus's death witnessed the familiar pattern of competing claimants dividing the kingdom's territories among themselves. Cersobleptes, the legitimate heir, controlled the central regions around the traditional royal capital, while his half-brothers Berisades and Amadocus established independent authority over the eastern and western territories respectively. But the external threat posed by Philip's Macedonia represented a qualitatively different challenge than previous Greek or barbarian enemies. Philip II possessed military capabilities and strategic vision that exceeded anything the Thracians had previously encountered. His innovations in infantry tactics, siege warfare, and military engineering had transformed the Macedonian army from a traditional Greek militia into a professional fighting force capable of sustained operations across vast territories. The Sarissa-armed phalanx formations that formed the core of Philip's military system provided unprecedented battlefield effectiveness, while his cavalry units and siege train enabled rapid conquest of fortified positions that had previously been considered impregnable. The Macedonian military machine that Philip deployed against Thracian territories operated according to strategic principles that emphasized systematic territorial conquest rather than the raiding and tribute extraction that had characterized earlier Greek interventions in Thracian affairs. The first major engagement between Macedonian and Thracian forces occurred in 357 BC near the fortress of Angulos, where Cersobleptes had concentrated approximately 8,000 warriors in an attempt to block Macedonian access to the gold-bearing regions of the Pangaean Hills. The battle demonstrated the tactical superiority that Philip's military reforms had achieved over traditional Thracian warfare methods. The disciplined Sarissa phalanx formations proved capable of withstanding cavalry charges that had previously broken Greek infantry lines. The Thracian cavalry, traditionally the decisive element in Balkan warfare, found themselves unable to penetrate the dense hedge of Sarissa points that protected the Macedonian infantry formations. The 1-8-foot spears, wielded by Philip's phalangites, created killing zones that extended far beyond the reach of traditional Thracian weapons, while the tight formation discipline prevented individual Thracian warriors from exploiting gaps in enemy lines through their customary tactics of sudden charges and rapid withdrawal. The engagement began at dawn with skirmishing between light infantry units, as both armies maneuvered for tactical advantage on the broken ground surrounding Ongolos. The decisive moment came when Cersobleptes ordered his cavalry to charge the Macedonian left flank. The charge initially achieved considerable success, breaking through the first line of Macedonian cavalry and threatening to roll up the entire enemy formation. However, Philip had anticipated this development and deployed reserve units that counterattacked the Thracian cavalry while they were engaged with his frontline forces. The Macedonian counterattack, led by Philip personally at the head of his elite companion cavalry, struck the Thracian mounted units while they were attempting to exploit their initial breakthrough. The superior armor and weapons of the Macedonian cavalry, combined with their disciplined formation fighting, proved decisive in close combat against Thracian warriors who had become separated from their supporting units during the charge. Within an hour of fierce fighting, the Thracian cavalry had been scattered or destroyed, leaving Cersobleptes' infantry formations exposed to coordinated attacks from multiple directions. The collapse of Thracian resistance at Ongolos opened the entire Pangaean Hills region to Macedonian occupation, providing Philip with control over the gold mines that had funded Odrysian power for generations. The loss of the Pangaean Hills represented a strategic catastrophe from which the Odrysian Kingdom would never fully recover. Philip's occupation of the gold mining regions involved the implementation of administrative systems that demonstrated the sophisticated governmental capabilities that Macedonia had developed under his leadership. Unlike previous conquerors who had contented themselves with tribute extraction, Philip established permanent administrative structures that integrated conquered territories into the expanding Macedonian state system. The mining operations under Macedonian control employed advanced extraction techniques and organizational systems that dramatically increased gold production beyond levels achieved under Thracian administration. The increased production generated revenues exceeding 1,000 talents annually, providing Philip with financial resources that dwarfed those available to any other contemporary ruler. The wealth flowing from the Pangaean Hills mines enabled Philip to maintain military forces on a scale that made sustained resistance by divided Thracian authorities virtually impossible. Cersobleptes attempted to compensate for his military disadvantages through diplomatic initiatives that sought to create a coalition of Greek city-states willing to support Thracian resistance against Macedonian expansion. His envoys traveled to Athens, where they found receptive audiences among political leaders who recognized that Philip's growing power threatened Athenian interests throughout the northern Aegean. The Athenian assembly voted to provide military assistance to Cersobleptes, including a force of 2,000 hoplites and financial subsidies designed to enable continued Thracian resistance. However, the Athenian commitment to Thracian resistance proved limited in scope and duration, as domestic political considerations and competing strategic priorities prevented sustained military intervention on the scale necessary to challenge Macedonian power effectively. Philip responded to Athenian intervention with characteristic strategic sophistication, implementing policies designed to isolate Cersobleptes diplomatically, while demonstrating the futility of resistance to potential allies. The siege of Perinthus in 340 BC demonstrated both the military capabilities that Philip could deploy against fortified positions and the limitations that geographic and logistical factors imposed on Macedonian operations in coastal regions where enemy naval power could provide effective support to besieged garrisons. Despite extensive siege works and the commitment of enormous resources over several months, Philip ultimately failed to capture Perinthus due to effective naval support provided by Athens and other Greek cities concerned about Macedonian expansion. The unsuccessful siege of Perinthus marked a turning point in Philip's approach to Thracian conquest, as he recognized that direct assault on heavily fortified coastal positions supported by Greek naval power exceeded his current capabilities. Instead, he shifted his strategy toward the systematic conquest of inland territories that could be isolated from external support, while providing the agricultural and mineral resources necessary to support continued expansion. The campaign against the interior strongholds controlled by Cersobleptes and his remaining allies proceeded according to different tactical and strategic principles that emphasized rapid movement, economic warfare, and the systematic elimination of Thracian military capabilities. Philip's forces advanced along multiple axes that prevented enemy forces from concentrating effectively, while disrupting agricultural production and trade networks that supported Thracian resistance. The siege of Kabyle in 342 BC represented the culmination of Philip's systematic campaign against the remaining centers of Thracian resistance. The fortress, which had been strengthened during Codus's restoration period, commanded the Tunja River Valley and served as the principal stronghold for Cersobleptes' remaining military forces. The Macedonian siege operations at Kabyle demonstrated the refinements in military engineering that Philip's forces had achieved through their extensive experience in siege warfare throughout the Balkans. The artillery weapons deployed against Kabyle included the most advanced catapult systems available to Greek military engineers, with torsion engines capable of hurling stones weighing up to 60 pounds with sufficient accuracy to target specific sections of the defensive walls. The final assault on Kabyle began before dawn, with coordinated attacks against multiple sections of the defensive perimeter. Macedonian infantry formations advanced under cover of artillery bombardment, while engineers detonated mines that had been excavated beneath key sections of the walls. The capture of Kabyle, after a siege lasting 6 weeks, effectively ended organized Thracian resistance to Macedonian expansion, as Cersobleptes and his remaining supporters found themselves without secure bases from which to continue their plans. Opposition. The systematic nature of Philip's conquest had eliminated not only the military forces that supported Thracian independence, but also the economic infrastructure and administrative systems that had enabled the Odrysian Kingdom function as an independent political entity. The transformation of the Odrysian Kingdom from an independent state to a Macedonian vassal represented a fundamental shift in the political organization of the southeastern Balkans that would have lasting consequences for the region's subsequent development. Cersobleptes retained the title of king and nominal authority over internal Thracian affairs, but his actions required approval from Macedonian officials who possessed ultimate authority over all significant political decisions. The military forces that had once made the Odrysian Kingdom a formidable regional power were systematically disbanded or incorporated into the expanding Macedonian army under the direct command of Macedonian officers. The gold mines of the Aegean hills, which had provided the financial foundation for Odrysian power, now generated revenues for Philip's treasury. The Odrysian Kingdom, which had once commanded 150,000 warriors and negotiated with Athens and Sparta as an equal, was now reduced to a puppet state, serving Macedonian interests. The transformation accelerated under Alexander the Great and continued through the Hellenistic period. Thracian nobles who possessed cultural flexibility and political acumen found opportunities for advancement within the Macedonian and later Hellenistic court systems. Thracian warriors served in Alexander's eastern campaigns. Approximately 7,000 cavalry and 5,000 infantry accompanied him to Asia, representing a substantial portion of the military resources that had previously supported Odrysian independence. At the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC, Thracian cavalry units operating on the Macedonian left wing played crucial roles in countering Persian cavalry charges The wars of the Diadochi that erupted following Alexander's death in 323 BC created brief opportunities for ambitious Thracian leaders to exploit conflicts between successors, but genuine independence remained elusive. The defeat of Perseus at the Battle of Pydna in 168 BC sent shockwaves throughout the Hellenistic world. For Thracian kingdoms that had maintained precarious independence through careful maneuvering between competing Hellenistic powers, the Roman victory created both unprecedented dangers and unexpected opportunities. The Roman approach to Thracian affairs reflected extensive experience managing client kingdoms throughout the Mediterranean world. Unlike the Hellenistic monarchs who had sought direct territorial control or tribute extraction, Roman administrators recognized that effective governance of peripheral regions required institutional arrangements that preserved local autonomy while establishing clear hierarchies of authority, ultimately serving Roman strategic interests. Codus III, who had maintained his kingdom's independence through careful neutrality during the Macedonian Wars, found himself confronting Roman envoys whose demands represented a fundamental challenge to traditional Thracian sovereignty. The Roman terms required formal acknowledgement of Roman suzerainty, annual tribute payments calculated according to territorial extent and economic capacity, and military assistance for Roman operations when requested. Codus ultimately accepted client kingdom status in 168 BC through a formal treaty that established the framework for Romano-Thracian relationships that would persist for over a century. The transformation of Thracian military forces from royal auxiliaries into imperial troops required careful attention to issues of loyalty, identity, and effectiveness. The cavalry formations that had been the pride of Thracian armies for centuries were reorganized according to Roman specifications that standardized equipment, training procedures, and command structures, while maintaining the mobility and individual fighting skills that had made Thracian horsemen legendary. The final annexation of Thracian territories under Claudius in 46 AD represented the culmination of a gradual process of integration that had transformed the kingdom from an independent political entity into a component of the Roman imperial system. The immediate catalyst was the assassination of Codus by his brother Rhascuporus, whose actions violated both traditional Thracian succession practices and Roman expectations regarding client kingdom stability. The archaeological legacy tells the story of what was lost. Southopolis, discovered in the 1940s, revealed a Hellenistic city surpassing contemporary Greek foundations in architectural sophistication. The Goyama Kosmatka tumulus contained golden wreaths and wall paintings, demonstrating enormous wealth and sophisticated artistic understanding. The Odrysian Kingdom stands as testament to the political ingenuity, military prowess, and cultural creativity that characterized the ancient Thracian peoples. For 5 centuries, from 460 to 46 BC, they carved an empire from tribal confederations, negotiated with Athens and Sparta as equals, commanded armies that made Macedonia tremble, and created cultural achievements that influenced Roman provincial governance for centuries. Remember this story. Share it with those interested in ancient history. And if you want to explore more forgotten civilizations that shaped our world, subscribe to Flow of History, where ancient empires come alive in ways that help you understand the present by understanding the past. The Odrysians are gone, but their legacy endures in the blood and culture of the Balkans, in the tactical innovations they pioneered, in the administrative systems they developed. They proved that so-called barbarians could build sophisticated states, rivaling anything Greece or Rome achieved, until those empires crushed them beneath superior resources and relentless ambition. That's the story of the Odrysian Kingdom. Sleep well.